That's just a pile of junk for a broke man, laughed Chloe Montgomery, a snobby real estate agent on Oak Ridge Lane in Atlanta. Her target was Darnell Brooks, a widowed black mechanic, who just bought a ruined $100 car from the junkyard. Chloe wanted to shame him in front of his son, Jordan, who was hugging his old toy tightly. But she did not know Darnell had the eyes of a genius mechanic. Instead of getting angry, Darnell stayed silent, fixing up this pile of junk to teach his son about human dignity. Facing a lack of tools, mean gossip, and heavy money pressure, how will he get by? Is this rusty pile of junk really a forgotten treasure, just like he senses? That cruel laugh from Chloe stayed in Darnell's chest all day long. It poked at an old wound that never fully healed. It pushed him to look hard at the life he and his son were living, one bill at a time. 2 years earlier, Tasha had been the one who kept this house feeling warm. She used to hum old gospel songs while she cooked dinner on Sunday nights. After the cancer took her, the house grew quiet in a way Darnell still had not gotten used to. Some nights he still reached for her side of the bed before he remembered she was gone. The neighbors on Oak Ridge Lane never got used to Darnell either. When he and Tasha first moved in, a few families brought over pies and warm handshakes. Those visits stopped fast once word spread about his job and the color of his skin. By the time Tasha passed, most of that early kindness had softly dried up. A police cruiser used to roll slowly past their house some nights, for no clear reason at all. Darnell never asked why. He just kept his porch light on and his hands visible, out of habit more than fear. The kitchen at 412 Oak Ridge Lane was small and quiet at 6:15 in the morning. Weak light crept through a window smudged with old grease. Darnell stood over the stove, warming up leftover potato soup from the night before. The pot was by then half empty. He stretched every last spoonful as far as it would go. Under his bed sat a rusty metal box. Inside it were red medical bills from Mercy Memorial Hospital. The number on top never changed no matter how hard he stared at it. It read $87 for $112.50. That debt came from the long months of cancer treatment for his late wife, Tasha. Jordan came down the stairs in socks, with holes worn through the heels. He held his old stuffed airplane close to his chest, the way he always did. Its name was Thunder. Tasha had sewn it herself the winter before Jordan was born, using scraps from an old flight jacket she loved. One wing was torn and faded from years of hugging. The boy looked up at his father with sleepy eyes. "Dad, do we have to drink watered-down milk again today?" Jordan asked, his small voice trailing off. Darnell knelt down and touched his son's hair gently. He smiled, even though his chest felt tight and heavy. "Just for today, buddy. Things will get better soon. I promise you that." He did not always believe his own words now, but he said them still, every single morning, like a small prayer. Darnell worked as a freelance mechanic around the block. He fixed generators and changed oil for the shiny SUVs owned by his neighbors. Each job paid him a flat $45, no matter how long it took. It was barely enough to keep the lights on some weeks. Every time he stepped outside in his oil-stained coveralls, curtains twitched across the street. Neighbors peeked through their blinds, without ever opening their doors. Nobody waved. Nobody said hello. They just watched him, like he did not belong on their side of the road. The Friday before, he had fixed a leaking radiator hose for a man 3 doors down. The man handed him 2 crumpled 20s, then wiped his own hand on his jeans right after their handshake. Darnell said nothing. He just packed up his tools and walked home, jaw tight, saying nothing about it to Jordan that night. Darnell often wondered if a broke, judged man like him could ever find a real chance at something better. Could his own 2 hands, hands that only knew bolts and wrenches, ever change his family's future for good? On Saturday morning at 8:30, Darnell drove out to Miller's Auto Wreckers on the southern edge of Atlanta. He needed a used air compressor for a repair job later that week. The lot smelled like old motor oil and wet rust, mixed with the sharp tang of scorched rubber in the morning sun. Somewhere near the back fence, a rusty conveyor chain creaked with a slow, tired rhythm. Crows called out from a stack of broken engine blocks, then scattered when Darnell's boots crunched over broken glass. He had walked this yard 100 times before. Something about that morning felt different, though he could not say why yet. In a far corner of the yard, half buried under a rotting canvas tarp, sat something strange. Two old truck tires were stacked heavy on top of it. It had no logo at all on its body. It had no wheels left at all. Just a strange metal frame, with smooth, curved lines, buried under a thick coat of deep orange rust. Darnell's trained eyes caught something the average buyer would all the way miss. The welds along the frame were done by hand, one careful pass at a time. They were neat, tight, and even, almost like the scales of a sleeping dragon. This kind of hand welding belonged only to elite racing shops, from decades long gone. He ran his bare fingers along one seam. Even through the rough rust, the metal under still felt smooth, almost warm from the morning sun. Something about the shape of it made his pulse quicken, though he could not yet explain why. He found old Miller, the half-deaf owner of the yard, sipping coffee near his trailer. Miller waved a lazy hand at the wreck. "That junk's been sitting there since the shop fire 10 years back," he said. "Take it for $100 and do me a favor, will you?" Darnell reached into his worn wallet. There was only $100 bill left inside it. He had planned to use that money for a small space heater before winter came around. He handed the bill over still, without a second thought. His friend Frank Boyd helped tow the wreck back to Darnell's garage. It was 10:47 on Sunday morning, and the street stayed quiet except for the low growl of Frank's old truck engine. The wrecked frame bumped along the road behind him, rust flaking off with every small turn. That's when Chloe Montgomery appeared beside her silver BMW, parked as always in front of her tidy lawn. Her heels clicked sharp against the pavement, and the smell of her perfume drifted over from a distance. She rolled down her window and let out a loud, sharp laugh that carried down the whole block. Her voice echoed off the same houses of Oak Ridge Lane. Jordan shrank back behind his father, hugging thunder tight against his small chest. "That's just a pile of junk for a broke man," Chloe said again, grinning at the small crowd forming behind her. Darnell stood dead still. He gripped an old rusty wrench tight in one hand. His knuckles turned pale white from the sheer pressure of his own grip, but his eyes stayed steady, locked on the broken pile of metal sitting in his driveway. What was hiding inside that $100 wreck? Something strong enough to make a poor mechanic risk his family's very last dollar of spare cash. That same afternoon, Jordan came home from school with his backpack strap broken and his eyes red from crying. A classmate had heard about Chloe's little show on the street. The boy had teased Jordan all day, calling his father a junkman in front of the whole class. Jordan did not want dinner that night. He just sat softly on his bed, holding thunder tight against his chest, saying nothing at all. Darnell sat beside him, without a word at first. Then he spoke slowly. "People are going to say all kinds of things, Jordan. What matters is what we know is true." Jordan nodded, but his small shoulders stayed slumped for the rest of the evening. The next morning, Jordan's teacher, Miss Ellery, called Darnell aside at drop-off. She had heard about the trouble from one more parent. "Your son talks about that car like it's magic," she said gently. "Whatever you're building out there, he believes in it completely." Her small kindness stayed with Darnell the whole drive home. That night, after Jordan had fallen fast asleep, Darnell sat alone out on the porch. A dim 40-watt bulb buzzed weakly above his head. Cold Atlanta wind slipped through the cracks in the old window frames, rattling the loose glass. He looked over his beat-up toolbox by lamplight. Inside sat a mismatched set of wrenches and a welding gun with a broken safety switch. He had no car lift, no proper garage space, and truly, no real plan at all. The electric bill had come earlier that week. It read $314.20, due by Friday at the latest. Darnell stared at the number until the ink seemed to blur in front of his tired eyes. Doubt crept slowly into his chest, cold and heavy. Maybe Chloe was right about him after all. Maybe he really was wasting precious time on a pile of trash, while his own son needed new shoes instead. He thought about selling the frame for scrap the next morning, just to be done with it. He thought about the space heater he still had not bought. For a moment, he almost convinced himself that quiet surrender would hurt less than one more public laugh from his neighbors. Earlier that same week, Jordan had softly offered up his own piggy bank, $3 and change, to help buy new tools. Darnell had gently refused the money, but the gesture stuck with him long after the lights went out. When the whole world keeps pouring cold water on your pride, how do you stop yourself from trusting every word of it? Frank and Darnell had known each other since high school shop class. Back then, they used to race go-karts built from old lawnmower engines. Frank had stood beside Darnell at Tasha's funeral too, holding Jordan's small hand, when Darnell could not speak. Their friendship had survived plenty of hard years by then. Monday morning, at 7 o'clock sharp, Frank knocked on Darnell's front door. He carried 2 cheap coffees from the corner store and a wooden crate full of old repair manuals. He had gotten them from a shuttered garage over in Macon. Frank flipped open one of the manuals and pointed at a hand-drawn diagram inside it. "Look at these exhaust lines, Darnell," he said. "This ain't some plain old car. This looks like Devin Hayes' work. You remember that name from way back?" Jordan wandered into the garage barefoot and set Thunder gently down on the rusty hood. "Dad, Thunder says this car has wings," the boy said, patting the torn stuffed wing. "You're gonna make it fly again, right?" Something in those simple words lit a small fire under Darnell's ribs. He remembered a quiet promise he made to Tasha before she passed away. Never let Jordan see you give up on something you truly love. Could the plain faith of a young boy and a stack of old paper manuals really carry a broke mechanic through such an unfair fight? That night, Darnell tucked Jordan into bed a little later than normal. Grease still clung under his fingernails from the day's work. Jordan yawned and asked a question that caught his father off guard. "Dad, did Mom ever see a car like this one?" Darnell sat on the edge of the small bed for a long moment. "Your mom loved anything that moved fast," he said softly. "She would have been out there with a flashlight, bugging me about every single bolt." Jordan laughed a little at that, his eyes by then growing heavy. Darnell stayed until his son's breathing slowed into sleep, then softly closed the door behind him. He walked back out to the garage and lifted the tarp corner just enough to look at the frame one more time. Somewhere out there, he thought, Tasha was probably laughing at how stubborn he had become over a pile of rust. At noon on Monday, Darnell signed a permit for a vintage car restoration project. He filed it right with the Georgia Department of Transportation. The filing fee cost him $35 flat. He bought 2 cheap blue tarps from the nearest Home Depot. He drove wooden stakes into the hard ground himself, building a makeshift shelter over the wreck at the mouth of his narrow garage. The steady clank of a hammer rang out from under that blue tarp, day and night, without much rest. Darnell had stepped into his own private world of focused work, cut off from the judgment waiting just outside his fence. What secrets would his patient hands uncover first, once the tarp door closed behind him each evening? Word of the strange blue tint spread quickly around Oak Ridge Lane. Some neighbors whispered that Darnell had lost his mind for good. Others simply stopped looking at him at all. They crossed the street every time they saw him holding tools toward the garage. Darnell barely noticed now. His whole world had shrunk down to bolts, rust, and the steady rhythm of his own hammer. On Tuesday afternoon, at 2:15, a man named Mr. Henderson knocked hard on Darnell's door. He led the local homeowners association, known simply as the HOA. He carried a stiff $250 fine in his hand. The paper claimed Darnell's scrap metal was an eyesore, and his tarp shelter broke a whole list of rules. Behind the fence, Chloe stood with her arms crossed tight over her chest. A smug little smile played at the corner of her painted lips. Mr. Henderson would not meet Darnell's eyes as he handed over the paperwork. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, like he felt bad about the errand. Inside the garage, Darnell hit a real wall. The rusted suspension bolts from 1969 had fused into one solid clump of hardened metal. Using a plain gas torch on them risked warping the thin steel of the whole frame permanently. So he mixed his own homemade rust remover instead. It was 3 parts industrial vinegar to 1 part kerosene, stirred carefully in an old bucket. He dripped it slowly onto the bolts, patient and steady, for 8 straight hours, without a break. Frank stood watch nearby and hunted through nearby junkyards for spare parts. He even loaned Darnell his own portable air compressor to help clear out the clogged fuel lines. On top of that, The original gear selector inside the transmission had worn down to a smooth, useless nub. No auto parts store within 100 miles carried anything close to a match. Darnell spent 3 long nights filing down a spare steel blank by hand. He checked the shape against an old photograph from Frank's manual every few minutes. His fingers cramped from gripping the small file. He kept going anyway. One evening, Jordan brought out a flashlight and held it steady over the engine bay while his father worked. He did not complain about his bedtime slipping later and later. He just wanted to help in the only way he knew how. Would the growing pressure from these HOA fines break Darnell down before he could finish tearing the car apart? Late Wednesday night, at 11:35, Darnell scrubbed the gray primer coating off the underside of the cabin. He worked slowly, right beside the metal firewall near the engine bay. Under a thick layer of grime and dust, a small brass plate slowly came into view. It read, Hayes Aero Test Number 1, 1969, D.H., in tiny, worn letters. Darnell froze in place, stiff as stone. His heart pounded hard against his ribs. He ran his thumb slowly over the engraved letters, half expecting them to disappear like some trick of the light. His hands shook as he searched the internet on his old cracked laptop screen. This was the one-of-a-kind test car built by the legendary engineer Devin Hayes. Old records claimed it had burned in a workshop fire back in 1979. It had vanished from American racing history ever since that terrible night. Darnell did not rush to tell anyone about it right away. He took careful photos of the odd weld marks and the frame's hidden serial number. At 1:12 in the morning, he posted a quiet question on a vintage car forum called Classic V8, registry.org. He asked about weight distribution on a Hayes test frame from 1969. A $1 million piece of forgotten history now sat inside a poor mechanic's tiny garage. How could he maybe keep it safe from greedy eyes nearby? Within an hour, a reply came back from a user named GearheadTX. Nice try, it read. Everybody knows the Hayes model burned up in '79. Post real photos or stop wasting people's time. Darnell almost typed back an angry answer, then stopped himself. He closed the laptop instead and let the truth speak for itself every time it was ready to. Thursday night, a sudden tropical storm rolled hard into Georgia. Hail and wind gusts up to 50 miles an hour battered the whole quiet block without warning. At 2:05 in the morning, the wind tore a corner clean off the blue tarp. Sharp, cold rain poured straight onto the bare steel frame Darnell had just stripped clean the day before. If that raw metal sat wet for 3 hours, deep rust would ruin every hour of his careful work. Darnell ran out into the freezing rain without even grabbing a coat. It felt like 8 degrees against his bare skin. He threw his own body over the torn tarp corner, trying hard to hammer the loose stakes back into the soft ground. Jordan woke up and saw his father fighting alone out in the storm. He grabbed his own old wool blanket and ran outside barefoot to cover the bare engine block. Darnell pulled his son close against his soaked chest. Both of them shivered hard under the pounding, freezing rain. His eyes never once left the car. "Hold on tight, Jordan," he shouted over the roaring wind. "We're not letting thunder get soaked out here." A stray spark from his shorting welding gun burned a long red mark clean across his left arm. He barely felt the sting through the cold. Thunder rumbled low across the sky, rattling the windows of every dark house on the street. Not one neighbor stepped outside to help. Behind their locked doors, curtains stayed shut tight against the storm and against the two figures fighting alone in the rain. The storm and fate itself seemed set on stealing his last spark of hope. Would this tired father keep the quiet promise he made to his son? Frank showed up at 4 in the morning, still in his pajama pants, holding extra rope and a spare tarp from his own garage. Together, the two men worked in silence under the last of the rain. They tied down every corner until the frame sat safe and dry once more. Neither of them said much. They did not need to. Friday morning, at 6:30 sharp, the storm had finally passed over. Clear blue sky stretched wide over all of Atlanta. The car sat safe under a brand new tarp Frank had helped reinforce right before sunrise. The bare steel frame gleamed like polished silver under the morning light. It showed off the smooth, curved lines that Devin Hayes had designed more than half a century earlier. Darnell opened his old laptop and saw a message waiting softly in his inbox. The little icon blinked bright red at the corner of the screen. A direct message had come from an account called s-cole-crd. It read, "I've been searching for this exact frame for 45 long years. Don't touch a single thing. My whole team and I are heading straight to Oak Ridge Lane. See you there at 10 tomorrow morning." That account belonged to none other than Sylvester Cole, the head of Cole Racing Development. Darnell read the message 3 times before he let himself believe it. His hands, still raw from the storm, shook a little as he typed back a short reply to set the time. He did not sleep much the rest of that night, though this time it was hope keeping him awake instead of worry. Was this strange reply a real lifeline at last, or just one more cruel joke floating around on the internet? Chloe had spent 3 years building her name as the unofficial queen of Oak Ridge Lane. She organized the block parties, chose the holiday decorations, and decided softly who counted as part of the community. Nobody on the street dared to challenge her opinion about anything, least of all a quiet mechanic with an old wrecked car. Chloe had grown up watching her own mother struggle to pay rent, a fact she rarely shared with anyone on Oak Ridge Lane. She had built her whole shiny life from nothing, one commission check at a time. Somewhere along the way, she started trusting that looking down on people like Darnell was proof she had truly made it. Chloe had spent the whole week convinced she was doing the right thing. In her mind, she was simply protecting property values and keeping the street looking proper. She told herself the fines and the tow order were just rules, nothing personal, nothing cruel. She signed every form, without reading past the first line, certain her own good name backed up whatever the paper said. Saturday morning, at right 9:15, Chloe showed up, with 2 city enforcement officers trailing behind her. A large yellow tow truck from Apex Towing rolled in right after them, blocking half the narrow street. Chloe held up a signed order stamped by the HOA. "This car is hazardous waste," she announced loudly. "It breaks every single safety code on this street. We have full legal authority to seize it and destroy it right now, today." Darnell stepped calmly in front of the tow truck's grill. Frank moved forward, without a word, and stood right beside him. Neighbors poured slowly out of their front doors, whispering and pointing at the whole strange scene. Chloe leaned in close and spoke low and cold into Darnell's ear. "It's over, poor man," she whispered. "Pay off your medical bills and forget your silly little engineer dreams for good." Darnell looked Chloe steadily in the eye, his voice calm despite the hook swinging closer. "You can take the car," he said softly, "but you can't take what I taught my son this week." Chloe rolled her eyes and turned away, waving the tow worker forward. The tow truck worker began slowly lowering a heavy steel hook toward the fragile frame. Jordan burst into loud tears, clutching thunder tight against his heaving chest. With less than 30 minutes left before Sylvester Cole was set to arrive, how could Darnell maybe save the car from the law itself? At right 9:55, the deep roar of engines rolled down the length of Oak Ridge Lane. 3 black Cadillac Escalades led a sealed transport truck marked with the bright red logo of Cole Racing Development. The whole convoy turned smoothly into the shared driveway, gravel crunching under heavy tires. Sylvester Cole, 72 years old, stepped out slowly wearing a sharp charcoal gray suit. His assistant, Naomi Ross, walked calmly beside him, along with 3 of the top mechanical engineers in the country. Sylvester waved off the startled tow truck worker with one firm hand. He knelt right down on the damp concrete outside Darnell's garage. He pulled out a small magnifying glass and studied the brass plate closely, his breath slow and careful. It read, "Hayes Aero Test Number 1. Tears rolled softly down the old man's weathered face when he found the engraved signature of his late friend, Devin Hayes. "It's really you," he whispered, his voice cracking softly. "Devin, old friend, there you are." Sylvester had raced alongside Devin Hayes back in the late 60s, long before either of them had any money to their name. After the workshop fire, Sylvester spent decades softly funding search after search, chasing rumors that never led anywhere. He had almost given up the search entirely, right before Darnell's photos appeared online. Sylvester rose back to his feet, slow and steady. He turned to face the stunned crowd of neighbors, and Chloe standing frozen among them like a statue. "This car is not trash," he said firmly. "This is the one and only surviving model ever built by Devin Hayes. Its minimum insured value alone is $6 million. Naomi Ross stepped forward with a folder in hand. "There's something else," she said calmly. "The HOA seizure order Miss Montgomery signed lists the vehicle's estimated value at less than $50. She never once had it checked before signing off on wrecking it." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Chloe had approved her own downfall with a single careless signature, too proud to double-check what she was destroying. Chloe stammered, her face suddenly drained of all its normal color. "No, that can't be right. It's just $100 wreck from some broke, widowed mechanic." Sylvester turned his cold, sharp eyes right onto her. "Miss Montgomery, the only thing truly poor here is your heart and your knowledge." Silence fell over the whole street. Somewhere nearby, an air conditioner clicked on, humming softly against the quiet. Not one neighbor dared to speak or even move. Jordan slid down from Sylvester's shoulders and ran to his father's side. He wrapped both arms around Darnell's waist and did not let go for a long moment. Nobody in the crowd said a single word. Mr. Henderson, the same HOA leader who once delivered the fine, slowly took off his cap. Mrs. Patterson from next door pressed a hand over her mouth in shock. A few of them exchanged glances, remembering every time they had watched Darnell through their blinds, without ever helping. An older man near the back of the crowd broke the silence at last. "I drove past that garage every morning," he muttered, mostly to himself. Never once thought to ask what he was building. Slowly, one by one, neighbors who had never spoken to Darnell before stepped forward to shake his hand. Mrs. Patterson offered to bring over a casserole that evening, the same kind of gesture she had never once extended in 3 long years. Darnell accepted each handshake politely, though his eyes stayed mostly on Jordan, still perched proudly on Sylvester's shoulders. He noticed how quickly a whole street could change its mind, and how little that change actually cost them now. When the real truth finally comes to light, what price will those who once mocked others have to pay for it? Naomi Ross stepped forward and handed Darnell a bank check drawn from Chase. The exact amount printed on it read $6,000,000,000. Darnell asked for just one small thing in return. He wanted Jordan Brooks' name carved onto the honor plaque at the National Racing Museum. The plaque would list him as the boy who named this legendary race car Thunder. Sylvester smiled warmly and agreed at once. He lifted Jordan up high onto his broad shoulders. Darnell wrote out a check right there on the spot for $87 for $112.50. He sent it straight over to Mercy Memorial Hospital to clear his late wife's medical debt for good, once and for all. He and Frank signed a lease soon after on a 5,000-square-foot space over on Marietta Boulevard. Together, the two friends opened a full restoration shop called Brooks and Boyd Restoration. Darnell also started something called the Tasha Brooks Scholarship Fund. It would cover school costs for kids from hardworking Black families all across Atlanta. The very first check from that fund went to a shy 12-year-old girl. She dreamed of becoming an engineer, just like the man whose name once got laughed at on this very street. Frank finally quit his second job driving delivery trucks at night. He spent his days now teaching young apprentices how to restore old engines by hand. He passed down the same patience Darnell had shown him for years. Kids from all over the block started stopping by the new shop after school just to watch the two men work. Darnell never turned a single one of them away. He handed out old wrenches like they were treasure, showing each child how to feel the smooth threads under all that rust. Some afternoons, Jordan sat on an overturned crate near the workbench, doing his homework, while the sound of tools filled the shop around him. He liked it better than any quiet living room. Out here, surrounded by grease and old engines, he felt closest to both of his parents at once. In the days that followed, Chloe tried calling old clients to smooth things over, but the calls went unanswered, one after another. Her listings sat untouched for weeks. Word of the driveway scene had traveled faster than any advertisement ever could. 3 weeks after the sale, The National Racing Museum held a small ceremony for the unveiling. Jordan stood on a little wooden step so he could reach the microphone. He read his father's name out loud, then his mother's name, then his own, all carved together on the same bronze plaque. Sylvester Cole stood behind him the whole time, one steady hand resting on the boy's shoulder. Reporters from 3 local stations packed the small room, but Jordan barely noticed the cameras. He kept glancing back at his father instead, checking to make sure he was watching. After the ceremony, Sylvester pulled Darnell aside for a quiet word. "Devin always said the best engineers hide in plain sight," he said. Looks like he was right about that too. Darnell simply nodded, unsure what else there was left to say. One quiet month later, at 5:30 in the evening, Chloe hung a plane for sale sign outside her house at 410 Oak Ridge Lane. Not one single neighbor stepped outside to say goodbye to her. Her silver BMW pulled slowly away into the fading orange light of dusk and did not come back. Darnell walked hand in hand with Jordan into his brand-new shop that same week. On the warm oak workbench sat Thunder, the old stuffed airplane, resting softly next to a shining red model of the legendary race car. Darnell knelt down beside his son, resting a steady hand on his shoulder. His voice was soft, but the words carried a lesson built to last a whole lifetime. "You see, Jordan, under the dirtiest layer of rust, if we have enough love and patience, we can always find a star that's ready to shine." Jordan looked up at his father and smiled, holding Thunder a little tighter than before. Outside their new shop window, the Atlanta sky glowed a soft, warm orange, promising a much brighter tomorrow ahead. Darnell thought back often too, that morning at the junkyard, and the $100 bill he almost did not spend. He never once felt bad about it. Some treasures, he had learned, only show themselves to the people patient enough to look past the rust.